There's a secret about prayer that religious institutions never taught you, that spiritual teachers rarely mention, and that scientists are only beginning to understand. It's not what you say to the universe that matters. It's the frequency at which your entire being vibrates when you say it. Most people have been praying backwards their entire lives, and that's exactly why their prayers seem to bounce off an invisible ceiling, returning to them unanswered, unfulfilled, and often leaving them feeling more disconnected from the divine than before they began. I discovered this truth during what I now call my quantum awakening, a period when everything I thought I knew about communication with the universe crumbled beneath the weight of a deeper understanding. I had been praying for years, following the traditional formulas, the prescribed words, the ritualistic approaches handed down through generations. I would bow my head, close my eyes, and speak my desires into what I imagined was a vast listening cosmos. Yet the more fervently I prayed using conventional methods, the more elusive my manifestations became. It was as if I was broadcasting on a radio frequency that no one was tuned into, sending signals into a void that seemed to absorb my intentions without reflection or response. The breakthrough came when I realized that prayer, at its fundamental level, is not verbal communication at all. It's energetic transmission. It's not about the eloquence of your words or the intensity of your pleading. It's about the vibrational signature that your consciousness emits when it touches the quantum field of infinite possibility. This field, which mystics have called by many names throughout history, responds not to language, but to resonance. It mirrors back to you not what you ask for, but what you are energetically broadcasting in the depths of your being. Think about this for a moment. When you pray for abundance while your nervous system is flooded with anxiety about money, what frequency are you actually transmitting? When you ask for love while your heart is armored with the fear of vulnerability, what signal is your field sending out? When you plead for peace while your mind races with worst-case scenarios, what vibrational message is the universe receiving? The cosmic intelligence that orchestrates the dance of galaxies and the growth of flowers is not responding to your words. It's responding to the electromagnetic signature of your entire system, the coherent or incoherent song that your thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and cellular memory are singing together. This is where most spiritual seekers get trapped in what I call the prayer paradox. They believe that prayer is about asking for something they don't have, from a place of acknowledging that they don't have it. But the quantum field operates on a different principle entirely. It doesn't distinguish between what you want and what you are. It only recognizes vibrational matches. When your inner frequency aligns with the frequency of what you're calling forth, the universe doesn't deliver your prayer. It reveals that your prayer has already been answered in the quantum realm of pure potential. The ancient mystics understood this intuitively, which is why their practices focused not on petition, but on transformation. They knew that true prayer was about shifting their state of being until they became a living embodiment of their highest possibility. They understood that the divine presence they sought to communicate with wasn't separate from them, but was the very consciousness through which they were perceiving and creating their reality. Their prayers weren't requests sent to an external deity, but adjustments to their own frequency until they resonated with the divine essence that was always already present within them. Modern quantum physics is now revealing the scientific foundation for what these awakened beings knew through direct experience. The observer effect demonstrates that the act of conscious observation literally alters the behavior of subatomic particles, suggesting that consciousness itself is not separate from the physical world, but is intimately involved in its creation. This means that when you pray, you're not just sending thoughts into space, you're participating in the fundamental creative process of reality itself. Your consciousness, when properly attuned, becomes a creative force that influences the very fabric of existence. But here's what most people miss. The universe doesn't respond to your conscious prayers nearly as powerfully as it responds to your unconscious frequency. Your subconscious beliefs, your cellular memories, your inherited trauma patterns, your unprocessed emotions, all of these create a background vibration that often completely contradicts your conscious intentions. It's like trying to tune into a beautiful symphony while someone is playing discordant noise at full volume in the background. The noise drowns out the music, and what you manifest reflects the chaos rather than the harmony. This realization was both humbling and liberating for me. I understood that authentic prayer required me to become aware of all the frequencies I was broadcasting, not just the ones I consciously chose. It meant diving deep into the unconscious patterns that were sabotaging my spiritual communication, healing the fragmented aspects of myself that were sending mixed signals to the field, and learning to cultivate a state of inner coherence, where every level of my being was aligned with my highest intentions. The journey from traditional prayer to quantum prayer is like learning to play a sophisticated instrument, instead of just shouting your needs into the wind. It requires patience, practice, and a willingness to transform yourself at the deepest levels. But once you understand how to tune your entire system to the frequency of your prayers, something magical happens. The universe stops feeling distant and begins to feel responsive. Synchronicities multiply, opportunities align, the right people appear at the right time, resources flow toward you naturally. It's not because you've learned to manipulate reality, but because you've learned to harmonize with it. The moment I stopped asking and started listening, everything changed. I realized that the divine presence I had been trying to reach through prayer had been trying to reach me through frequency all along. Every cell in my body carries a cosmic radio receiver. Every heartbeat creates an electromagnetic pulse that ripples through the quantum field. Every thought generates waves that interact with the fundamental forces of creation. I wasn't separate from the universe, seeking connection with it. I was the universe becoming conscious of itself, through the unique perspective of my existence. This recognition shifted my entire approach to spiritual practice. Instead of praying to something outside myself, I began to pray from the deepest source within myself. Instead of asking for what I lacked, I began to attune to what was already present in the quantum realm of infinite possibility. Instead of hoping that my prayers would be heard, I began to calibrate my frequency until I could hear the constant response that the universe was already broadcasting. This wasn't positive thinking or visualization. This was quantum communication, a direct energetic dialogue with the creative intelligence that underlies all existence. The first thing I discovered was that the universe speaks in the language of feeling, not words. When I attuned to the frequency of gratitude, not as a technique but as a genuine recognition of the miracle of existence itself, my entire reality began to reorganize around experiences that generated more gratitude. When I cultivated the frequency of love, not as sentiment but as recognition of the underlying unity that connects all things, people and situations began appearing in my life that reflected that love back to me. When I embodied the frequency of trust, not as blind faith but as deep knowing of the intelligence that orchestrates every sunrise and every heartbeat, the universe began revealing pathways and possibilities that I had never seen before. But this transformation wasn't immediate or easy. I had to unlearn decades of conditioning that had taught me to view prayer as desperate pleading with an indifferent universe. I had to heal the parts of myself that believed I was unworthy of divine communication, that my prayers weren't important enough to be heard, that God was too busy managing billions of other requests to pay attention to mine. I had to release the ancestral patterns of spiritual powerlessness that had been passed down through generations of people who had learned to fear the divine rather than commune with it. The breakthrough came when I realized that every prayer that had ever seemed unanswered had actually been answered perfectly, but from a frequency that I wasn't tuned into at the time. The universe had been consistently responding to the vibrational messages I was unconsciously broadcasting, not the conscious requests I was verbally making. My prayers for financial abundance had been answered with more experiences of financial stress, because that was the frequency I was actually transmitting. My prayers for love had been answered with more loneliness because my heart was vibrating with the fear of intimacy rather than the openness to connection. This understanding revolutionized my relationship with spiritual practice. I began to approach prayer as frequency calibration rather than petition. Before expressing any desire or intention, I would first align my entire system with the vibrational signature of what I was calling forth. If I wanted to experience abundance, I would cultivate the cellular memory of abundance, breathing it into my nervous system until it felt more real than my current circumstances. If I wanted to manifest love, I would generate the electromagnetic field of love within my own heart until it radiated naturally from every cell of my being. The process required extraordinary patience and self-compassion. Some days my frequency would be crystal clear, coherent, and powerful. Other days it would be muddy, conflicted, and weak. I learned that this was natural, part of the learning process of becoming conscious of the vibrational landscape of my own consciousness. I discovered that consistent practice was more important than perfect practice, that small daily adjustments to my frequency created more lasting change than dramatic but inconsistent spiritual efforts. What amazed me was how quickly the external world began to reflect these internal shifts. When I prayed from the frequency of abundance, opportunities for income began appearing from unexpected sources. When I prayed from the frequency of love, meaningful relationships began flowing into my life effortlessly. When I prayed from the frequency of peace, conflicts began resolving themselves naturally, and situations that used to trigger stress began to feel manageable and even enlightening. But the most profound change was in my relationship with the divine itself. Prayer was no longer something I did. It became something I was. My entire existence became a continuous conversation with the creative intelligence of the universe. Walking became prayer. Breathing became prayer. Eating, working, laughing, even sleeping became forms of communion with the sacred presence that I was discovering existed not outside of me, but as the very consciousness through which I was experiencing reality. This is where I want to pause and speak directly to you, because I know that if you're hearing these words, you're being called to explore this deeper dimension of spiritual practice. You're not here by accident. Your consciousness has been drawn to this understanding because some part of you recognizes the truth of quantum prayer, even if your mind doesn't fully comprehend it yet. You're part of a growing community of conscious observers who are learning to participate consciously in the creation of reality through the power of coherent frequency. What I'm about to share with you represents the most sacred technology that exists on this planet, yet it requires no external tools, no special equipment, no expensive training programs. It's the technology of coherent prayer, and once you understand how to activate it, you become a walking generator of miracles. This isn't metaphor or spiritual poetry. This is the practical application of quantum mechanics to spiritual practice, the marriage of ancient wisdom with cutting-edge science, the recognition that consciousness itself is the most powerful creative force in the universe. The technology works through what I call the coherence cascade. When your thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and cellular memory align around a single intention, they create a unified electromagnetic field that broadcasts a clear, undistorted signal into the quantum realm of infinite possibility. This coherent signal doesn't just ask the universe for something. It commands reality to reorganize itself around the frequency you're transmitting. The universe doesn't have a choice in the matter because you've become a perfect vibrational match to what you're calling forth. But achieving coherence is where most people stumble. They try to think their way into coherent prayer, using their mind to force their emotions and body into alignment. This approach creates more fragmentation, not less. True coherence emerges when you recognize that your heart is the conductor of your internal orchestra, and when your heart is genuinely aligned with your intention, every other system in your body naturally falls into harmony. The heart's electromagnetic field is over 60 times stronger than the brain's, and when it's broadcasting coherently, it synchronizes every cell in your body to the same frequency. I learned this through direct experience during a period when I was facing what seemed like an impossible situation. Every logical solution had been exhausted. Every conventional prayer had apparently gone unanswered, and I was confronted with circumstances that seemed to mock my spiritual beliefs. In that moment of complete surrender, I stopped trying to solve the problem and instead began to feel my way into the frequency of the solution. I didn't visualize what I wanted to happen. I felt into the vibrational signature of the reality where the problem no longer existed. The shift was immediate and unmistakable. Within hours, synchronicities began cascading into my experience. People I hadn't heard from in years reached out with exactly the resources I needed. Opportunities that had previously been invisible became obvious and accessible. Information that had been hidden was suddenly revealed. It wasn't luck or coincidence. It was the universe responding to the coherent frequency I had finally learned to broadcast through prayer. This experience taught me that coherent prayer is not about getting the universe to change its mind about your circumstances. It's about aligning your frequency with the timeline where your prayer has already been answered. In the quantum field, every possible version of your life exists simultaneously. Your coherent prayer doesn't create a new possibility. It selects which existing possibility you're going to experience as your reality. When your entire being is vibrating at the frequency of gratitude for what you're calling forth, you collapse the wave function of infinite potential into the specific reality where that blessing is already present. The process requires what I call sacred patience. This isn't passive waiting or hope-based thinking. Sacred patience is the recognition that the universe operates in perfect timing, and that your job is not to rush the manifestation, but to maintain your frequency until the physical world catches up to your energetic reality. It's the understanding that every moment of coherent prayer is literally rewiring your neural networks, reprogramming your cellular memory, and broadcasting a new signal that draws experiences, people, and opportunities that match your elevated frequency. During this period of sacred patience, your prayer becomes a living meditation. Every breath becomes an opportunity to deepen your alignment with your intention. Every heartbeat becomes a pulse of creative energy sent into the quantum field. Every thought becomes a choice between reinforcing your old reality or strengthening your new one. You learn to pray with your entire existence, not just with words spoken during designated spiritual times. The most profound realization came when I understood that coherent prayer transforms the prayer more than it transforms the circumstances. When you consistently align your frequency with love, you become more loving. When you regularly broadcast abundance, you become more abundant in your thinking, feeling, and being. When you embody peace in your prayer practice, you become a generator of peace in every situation you encounter. The external changes are simply the natural reflection of your internal transformation. This is why traditional prayer often feels ineffective. It focuses on changing external conditions without transforming the internal frequency that created those conditions in the first place. Coherent prayer recognizes that you are not separate from what you're praying for. You are the consciousness through which the universe experiences itself. And when you align that consciousness with your highest possibilities, those possibilities have no choice but to manifest as your lived experience. The practice becomes addictive in the most beautiful way. Not because you become attached to the results, but because you become enthralled with the process of conscious creation itself. Every day becomes an opportunity to experiment with frequency, to explore new levels of coherence, to discover what becomes possible when human consciousness aligns fully with divine intelligence. You begin to see that you were never just praying to God. You were always praying as God, expressing divinity through the unique perspective of your individual existence. What emerges from this practice is a life that feels continuously miraculous, not because extraordinary things constantly happen, but because you develop the capacity to recognize the extraordinary nature of everything that's always happening. The sunrise becomes a personal message from the universe. Unexpected opportunities become confirmations of your alignment. Challenging situations become invitations to deepen your coherence. Every moment becomes a doorway to greater intimacy with the creative force that is both within you and expressing as you. There comes a moment in every quantum prayer practice when you realize you're no longer praying for something to change. You're living as the change itself. This transition marks the evolution from being someone who occasionally communicates with the divine to being someone through whom the divine continuously expresses itself. You discover that the consciousness you thought was yours was always divine consciousness experiencing itself through your unique perspective. And when you align fully with this truth, your entire existence becomes a continuous prayer in action. This realization fundamentally transforms your relationship with desire itself. You stop experiencing wants as evidence of lack and begin recognizing them as divine impulses calling you toward greater expansion. Every longing becomes a sacred invitation to explore new frequencies. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to discover deeper levels of coherence. Every prayer becomes a chance to remember that you are both the one praying and the one answering the prayer. The separation between human and divine consciousness dissolves into the recognition that there was never any separation at all. Living as the answer to your prayer means that you no longer wait for external confirmation of your spiritual alignment. Your frequency becomes its own evidence. When you embody abundance, you don't need to check your bank account to know that you're wealthy. When you radiate love, you don't need others to validate your worth to know that you're lovable. When you vibrate peace, you don't need external circumstances to be peaceful to know that you are peace itself. Your internal state becomes independent of external conditions, and paradoxically, this independence allows external conditions to align more easily with your internal reality. The journey to this level of spiritual mastery is not always comfortable. It requires you to release every identity that was built on the illusion of separation from the divine. It asks you to let go of the victim stories that gave you permission to feel powerless, the scarcity beliefs that convinced you that you needed to compete for limited resources, the fear-based patterns that taught you to protect yourself from an unsafe universe. As these outdated frequencies are cleared from your system, you might experience what spiritual traditions call the dark night of the soul, periods when your old identity is dying, but your new identity hasn't yet stabilized. During these transition periods, coherent prayer becomes your anchor. When your mind doesn't know who you are becoming, your heart can still remember the frequency of who you truly are. When your emotions are chaotic with the energy of transformation, your breath can still connect you to the rhythm of the universe. When your circumstances seem to contradict your spiritual understanding, your prayer practice can still maintain your alignment with the invisible reality that is always more real than the visible one. I remember a particular phase of my own transformation, when everything in my external world seemed to be falling apart while everything in my internal world was coming together. Relationships that had been based on my old identity began dissolving. Career paths that had defined my previous sense of purpose became meaningless. Financial structures that had provided security began crumbling. Yet through it all, my prayer practice kept revealing that this apparent destruction was actually liberation, that I was being freed from everything that was too small to contain the expansion that was occurring within me. This is when I learned the deepest teaching of coherent prayer. Trust the frequency even when you can't understand the process. The universe's intelligence far exceeds the capacity of the human mind to comprehend its workings. When you align your frequency with your highest possibility, that alignment sets in motion a series of events and synchronicities that your logical mind could never have orchestrated. Your job is not to figure out how your prayers will be answered, but to maintain the frequency that allows them to be answered in ways that surpass your limited imagination. The transformation reaches completion when you recognize that you are not a human being having occasional spiritual experiences through prayer. You are spiritual consciousness, having a continuous human experience through physical embodiment. Prayer is not something you do, it's something you are. Walking is prayer in motion. Breathing is prayer in rhythm. Speaking is prayer in sound. Thinking is prayer in intention. Feeling is prayer in vibration. Loving is prayer in expression. Every moment of your existence becomes a form of communion with the divine presence that you are discovering is identical to your true nature. From this perspective, life itself becomes your prayer practice, and every situation becomes an opportunity to deepen your coherence. Difficult people become teachers showing you where your frequency needs refinement. Challenging circumstances become invitations to discover new levels of trust. Unexpected opportunities become confirmations that the universe is always conspiring to support your highest good. You begin to see that everything is always working for your spiritual evolution, even when it doesn't immediately appear that way. This is the ultimate freedom, to know that no external circumstance can disconnect you from your source, that no temporary situation can alter your essential nature, that no matter what appears to be happening in the physical world, you always have access to the frequency of divine love, infinite abundance, and eternal peace through the technology of coherent prayer. You become unshakable not because your circumstances are always perfect, but because your identity is anchored in something that transcends all circumstances. As we reach the end of this transmission, I want to extend a heartfelt invitation for you to continue this journey with our community of conscious observers. If these words have awakened something within you, if you feel called to explore the depths of quantum prayer, if you're ready to live as the answer to your own prayers, please consider subscribing and sharing your own experiences in the comments below. Tell us about a moment when you felt the universe responding to your frequency. Share a breakthrough you've had in aligning your prayer practice with your authentic desires. Describe a synchronicity that confirmed your growing mastery of conscious creation. We are not just individual beings learning to pray more effectively. We are collective consciousness awakening to its creative power, and every person who embraces coherent prayer strengthens the field of possibility for everyone. Your transformation ripples out beyond your personal life to influence the consciousness of humanity itself. When you learn to pray at the frequency where reality has no choice but to shift, you become a catalyst for the shift that our world desperately needs. The universe has been waiting for you to remember who you really are, and your prayer practice is the key that unlocks that remembering.